This summer, I'm going to give a class in mushroom identification at the New School for Social Research. When I proposed it to Dean Clara Meyer, she spoke to Professor McIver, who lives in Piermont. She said, "What do you think about our having a mushroom class at the new school?" He said, "Fine idea. Nothing more than mushroom identification develops the powers of observation." This remark was relayed both to the president and to me. It served to get the class into the catalog and to verbalize for me my present attitude toward music. It isn't useful, music isn't, unless it develops our powers of audition. But most musicians can't hear a single sound. They listen only to the relationship between two or more sounds. Music for them has nothing to do with their powers of audition, but only to do with their powers of observing relationships. In order to do this, they have to ignore all the crying babies, fire engines, telephone bells, coughs that happen to occur during their auditions. Actually, if you run into people who are really interested in hearing sounds, you're apt to find them fascinated by the quiet ones. "Did you hear that?" they will say. One day when the windows were open, Christian Wolff played one of his pieces at the piano. Sounds of traffic, boat horns, were heard not only during the silences in the music, but being louder, were more easily heard than the piano sounds themselves. Afterward, someone asked Christian Wolff to play the piece again with the windows closed. Christian Wolff said he'd be glad to, but that it wasn't really necessary, since the sounds of the environment were in no sense an interruption of those of the music. During recent years, Daisetsu Taitaro Suzuki has done a great deal of lecturing at Columbia University. First he was in the Department of Religion and then somewhere else. Finally he settled down on the 7th floor of the Philosophy Building. The room had windows on two sides, a large table in the middle with ashtrays. There were chairs around the table and next to the walls. These were always filled with people listening, and there were generally a few people standing near the door. The time was 4 to 7. During this period, most people took now and then a little nap. Suzuki never spoke loudly, and when the weather was good, the windows were open and the airplanes leaving LaGuardia flew directly overhead, drowning out from time to time whatever he had to say. He never repeated what had been said during the passage of the airplane. 3 lectures I remember in particular. While he was giving them, I couldn't for the life of me figure out what he was saying. It was a week or so later, while I was walking in the woods looking for mushrooms, that it all dawned on me.
The form of government is no government at all. The form of government is no government at all. And that will be what we will have when we are ready for it. And that will be what we will have, and that...
Turning.
Answered a journalist from Illinois who asked me to put all my philosophy into a nutshell. Get out of whatever cage you find yourself in.
The interior of the deconsecrated church of St. James's in Islington, London, was refurbished and redecorated in the year of John Cage's 70th birthday for the performance of a John Cage musical circus. A dozen works composed by John Cage over the last 40 years were performed in the space of 2 hours. The way in which they were performed was arranged by a process of chance operations, which determined that several of the works would be played simultaneously and practically all of them would, at some time, overlap.
When Sri Ramakrishna was asked, why, if God is good, is there evil in the world? He replied, to thicken the plot.
Not as you would like it to be, not as it's supposed to be, and I think that works better for sounds which are not music.
A piece of music, no matter who writes it, if it gets played many times, as this concert does, goes through a variety of experiences. I think some people take it too seriously. I think some people don't take it seriously enough, and other people play it just right. In 1954, when I went to Europe, I no sooner arrived in Paris than I noticed that the city was covered with posters publicizing a mushroom exhibition that was being held in the Botanical Gardens. When I arrived, I found myself in a large room filled with many tables upon which were displayed many species of fungi. On the hour, from a large centrally placed loudspeaker, a recorded lecture on the deadly poisonous Amanita was delivered. During this lecture, nobody in the hall moved or spoke. Each person's attention was, so to speak, riveted to the information being given. A week later, I was in Köln, in Germany, attending a concert of electronic music. There was also an audience and a large loudspeaker. However, many in the audience were dozing off, and some were talking to their neighbors. Schwanze points out that a beautiful woman who gives pleasure to men serves only to frighten the fish when she jumps in the water. I think my very first step in music composition was the accompaniment for a water ballet. I used percussion instruments, and when the people swam below the water, they couldn't hear the instruments. So it occurred to me that to put a gong in the water, and then it could be heard either below the surface of the water or above. And it worked perfectly, and that's the beginning of the water gong. Of course, the people above heard one pitch and the other below heard a different one, but that made no difference. What was important was the time.
And the moon's whispering sunset thrushes toward dusk, or tree-filled rock. Why-colored worlds of because do not stand against yes, which is built by forever, and
An Eskimo lady who couldn't speak or understand a word of English was once offered free transportation to the United States plus $500, providing she would accompany a corpse that was being sent back to America for burial. She accepted. On her arrival, she looked about and noticed that people who went into the railroad station left the city and she never saw them again. She also noticed that before leaving, they went to the ticket window, said something to the salesman, and got a ticket. She stood in line, listened carefully to what the person in front of her said to the ticket salesman, repeated what that person said, and then traveled wherever he traveled. In this way, she moved about the country from one city to another. After some time, her money was running out, and she decided to settle down in the next city she came to and to live there the rest of her life. But when she came to this decision, she was in a small town in Wisconsin from which no one that day was traveling. However, in the course of her travels, she had picked up a bit of English. So finally, she went to the ticket window and said to the man there, "Where would you go if you were going?" He named a small town in Ohio where she lives to this day. Years ago in Chicago, I was asked to accompany two dancers who were providing entertainment at a businesswomen's dance party given in a hall of the YWCA. After the entertainment, the jukebox was turned on so everybody could dance. There was no orchestra. They were saving money. However, the goings-on became very expensive. One of the arms in the jukebox moved a selected record onto the turntable. The playing arm moved to an extraordinarily elevated position. After a slight pause, it came down rapidly and heavily on the record, smashing it. Another arm came into the situation and removed the debris. The first arm moved another selected record onto the turntable. The playing arm moved up again, paused, came down quickly, smashing the record. The debris was removed by the third arm, and so on. And meanwhile, all the flashing colored lights associated with jukeboxes worked perfectly, making the whole scene glamorous. Sibylla Ford, an extraordinary black dancer, made a dance called Bacchanal. It would have been perfect to use percussion instruments accompanying her dance, but the theater in the Cornish School had no wings, and the the house was very small, and there was just room for our grand piano. So the music had to be made on a piano. It couldn't be made with percussion instruments. And the time was short because she had asked me to write the piece on Tuesday and the performance was on Friday. So I thought, what's wrong is not me, because I'm working as conscientiously as I can. The trouble is with the piano. So I decided to change it. I went into the kitchen and got a pie plate and came back and put it on the strings. And I knew I was going in the right direction when I heard the sound, but it bounced. So I thought we'll have to put something that'll stay in position. And so I got a nail and it slipped. Then I got a wood screw, and with the grooves, it was just right. It stayed in position. And shortly I had such fascinating possibilities that I wrote the Bacchanal very quickly. It was after I got to Boston that I went into the anechoic chamber at Harvard University. Anybody who knows me knows this story. I am constantly telling it. Anyway, in that silent room, I heard two sounds, one high and one low. Afterward, I asked the engineer in charge why, if the room was so silent, I had heard two sounds.
Right.
He said, describe them. I did. He said, the high one was your nervous system in operation. The low one was your blood in circulation. Well, my experience in the anechoic chamber to hear my nervous system in operation and my blood circulating gave me the feeling of being at a crossroads. I could either go in the direction of intention, as everyone else was going, or I could explore the avenue that no one else was exploring, the absence of intention, since those two sounds which I was making, I did not intend to make.
Yes.
Since as a human being, I was basically a machine over which I had no intentional control.
He sheds a flower, he's from another place. You look so good, it's so easy.
York, when I was setting out to write the orchestral parts of my concert for piano and orchestra, which was performed September 19, 1958 in Cologne, I visited each player, found out what he could do with his instruments, discovered with him other possibilities, and then subjected all these findings to chance operations, ending up with a part that was quite indeterminate of its performance. After a general rehearsal during which the musicians heard the result of their several actions, some of them, not all, introduced in the actual performance sounds of a nature not found in my notations, characterized for the most part by their intentions which had become foolish and unprofessional. In Cologne, hoping to avoid this unfortunate state of affairs, I worked with each musician individually, and the general rehearsal was silent. I should let you know that the conductor has no score but has only his own part, so that though he affects the other performers, he does not control them. Well, anyway, the result was, in some cases, just as unprofessional in Cologne as in New York. I must find a way to let people be free without their becoming foolish, so that their freedom will make them noble. My problems have become social rather than musical.
Do you remember why I annoyed Golea so much?
You didn't annoy him, you infuriated him. I think you said something about Beethoven. It had to do something with bells. It was better to listen
must
to
have been a cowbell.
Cowbells, yes, exactly. And he was so angry, he just got up and walked out.
Oh.
That was really a moment of anxiety. But with what you didn't hear were the discussions thereafter. You can't imagine how heated they were, the pros and the contras. Now don't tell me on which side I was.
No.
Whichever side, I was invited to the mushroom dinner. I loved that.
But Steinicke told me later that he didn't know what effect I had on the musical thinking at Darmstadt, but he was certain that I had improved the cuisine. I follow the macrobiotic diet now, and I'm grateful to Yoko Ono and John Lennon. They had been for many years following the macrobiotic diet. What it is a refusal of animal fats, use instead of vegetable oils. My wrists used to be this thick. I couldn't have lifted this cup 9 years ago. And within 1 week of the changed diet, I had no further need for aspirin. I had been taking 12 aspirin a day for 15 years at the advice of fine doctors. I spent two days, I would say, in shock at the notion of not eating butter again. Shizuko used to say, don't take the diet too seriously. I said, what do you mean when you say don't take the diet too seriously? And she said, well, when you're with friends, you could have a potato.
Oggi fatti la vostra vita! la morte. As well say that the sun is black. Donc je fasse bon.
Music from churches.
My discomfort. I explained to Daniel Shaw my uneasiness when confronted with any attempt to construct a discourse which...
And that will be the kind of government we'll have when we are ready for it, ready for it. And that will be the kind of government we'll have, and that will be ready for it.
The revelation. The revelation. The apocalypse.
But she's got bad knees.
It was a Wednesday. I was in the 6th grade. I overheard Dad saying to Mother, "Get ready. We're going to New Zealand Saturday." I got ready. I read everything I could find in the school library about New Zealand. Saturday came. Nothing happened. The project was not even mentioned that day or any succeeding day. One day while I was composing, the telephone rang. A lady's voice said, "Is this John Cage, the percussion composer?" I said yes. She said, "This is the J. Walter Thompson Company." I didn't know what that was, but she explained that their business was advertising. She said, "Hold on, one of our directors wants to speak to you." During a pause, my mind went back to my composition. Then suddenly a man's voice said, "Mr. Cage, are you willing to prostitute your art?" I said yes. He said, "Well, bring us some samples Friday at 2. I did. After hearing a few recordings, one of the directors said to me, "Wait a minute." Then 7 directors formed what looked like a football huddle. From this, one of them finally emerged, came over to me and said, "You're too good for us. We're going to save you for Robinson Crusoe."
no government at all. And that will be what we will have when we are ready. And that will be the kind of government we'll have when we are ready for it, ready for it, ready for it. The best form of government is no government at all. And that is what we will have, and that will be what we will have when we are ready, when we are.
Cordy.
We are ready for it. And that's the kind we'll have when we are ready. The best form of government is no government at all.
Artists talk a lot about freedom. So, recalling the expression free as a bird, Morton Feldman went to a park one day and spent some time watching our feathered friends. When he came back, he said, "You know, they're not free. They're fighting over bits of food."
Isn't this sound marvelous? This combination of birds and airplanes. When I was in Australia touring, I would early in the morning go to the botanical gardens where the gardeners had conveniently taken away all the dry material. Mm-hmm. And then I would search through the material which they had laid out for me and take what I wanted. Then I would go to the theater and rehearse in the afternoon and then perform in the evening. Because when you use plant materials, you know that the material obsolesces. I found a music stand in the Japan Society in New York, 3 or 4 years ago, when I was to accompany Merce Cunningham in one of our dialogues. And it was an old music stand, and if I turned it upside down and used the 3 legs, you know, to drive it across the wooden floor, the relation between my driving and the frictional sound of the rack on the floor I wasn't able to control it because of the oldness of and some kind of break in the connection. The result was whatever I did, I got something that wasn't in my mind to get. And that leads to a kind of improvisation that results in discoveries. The same is true of conch shells filled with water, particularly with respect to the time of the gurgle. You have no way of controlling it. You can think that you have the shell under control or the gurgle under control, and you do just exactly what you're supposed to do to get the sound, and nothing occurs. And then before you know it, even when you don't intend to do anything, it gurgles. I don't myself use records, and I give the example of someone who lives happily without records. But I notice that no one pays any attention to me. Or maybe a few pay attention, but most people use records.
Well, it's useful to hear music from concerts or performances
It's
that you
really
could never
not,
get to.
No, it's really not useful at all.
Well,
it merely destroys one's need for real music. It substitutes artificial music for real music, and it makes people think that they're engaging in a musical activity when they're actually not. And it has completely distorted and turned upside down the function of music in anyone's experience. For instance, if you don't believe what I've said, I was present at a concert conducted by Stravinsky of one of his own works.
Right.
And I was sitting behind a 10-year-old child and his father. And after the performance was finished, the child turned to his father and said, "That isn't the way it goes." And another, I told that story to someone, and I received this one, which is charming. A child in a similar circumstance turned to his mother and said, "Why don't they turn the record over?" She who had given his eyes for her bed and the tomb. Journey to art, see the combing of the pyramids of Egypt. Gracias to the sky, he's my old Jerusalem, and I'm his home, my jungle Victoria. You all say to jumbo, to giants, Two waves of hope I now stop the water where it should flow, and I know. I was asked by Tri-Quarterly editor Elliot Anderson to make a text or a piece of music, anything he said, about Joyce. And I wrote back and said I was too busy. And he kept pestering me. And finally, I thought the easiest way to stop the correspondence and to stop the interruption of my work would be to comply with his request. And so I opened the Finnegan's Wake at random, and I'd always loved the book, but I'd never, and I had read excerpts to entertain my friends, but I'd never read from cover to cover. And I opened the book in the middle, not by chance, but at random. And I wrote Misostics on the name of Joyce, from where I opened the book to the end of that chapter. Jappy Jack among Sibylline Molecule, King of Old Kong. Practical joke piece, cool Celtic old comedian. His house about him, with invariable broad stretch to juke and calicut I'm afraid there is not one tool that could my happy Joy had been variety had stimulus in the shape of G and G. Juiced after taking their liquor from highway and round Misostics are taking the first J, James Joyce, looking for the first J in a word that didn't have an A after it, and then looking for the next word that had an A that didn't have an M after it, and so on. And so I was able to go quite rapidly through that chapter, and I made 23 Misostics, James Joyce, and sent them to the Tri-Quarterly. His Majesty, that one king among rhapsodies, height, decent, store, jail, Horace, jail of Mount John, jail him and John. He was sick, 7 yards uneasily, Jones in the back caught his death, Klaus Schoening of the West German radio, hearing that I'd written this text that could be read in the space of an hour, asked me if I'd read it for his program. Joyce, and any work with Joyce, has the advantage of not having to be translated, since it can't be translated. And I said I was willing to read it for his program. And then he said, would you also be willing to write some music to go with it? And not knowing what I would write, I wrote back and said, yes, I would be willing to do that. Once I had agreed, I then had to put my thinking cap on. And the marvelous thing about Joyce is that his work is so complex. My work has never been as complex as the work of Joyce. And I wanted in the Roratorio to make something that would be appropriate in its complexity. Having room up to all, Queen room in for the church, revolve and feast like the animal sky, the streets that joy, some major bore should wind from. While I was putting it together with John Fullerman at IRCAM in Paris, Frans van Rossum from Holland came to hear what I was doing. He said, putting all these sounds together, aren't you afraid that you're going to get white noise? And I said, I'm sure it'll be noise, but I doubt whether it'll be white. Do you prefer these? Lively nose, Japanese minor, take your head out of your back stripes, cheek by jowl with his fisherman's blood for an animal were all the base you bound hands together behind. There are many elements in it which are not controlled by me and which are free to move as elements in a mobile, particularly the Irish traditional music. Corner boys come monkeying and this guy, the pilo's pipe. And she's trying to hug those together. She swore on cross-sticks, 9 wind about. She's too quick.
That I come
Christians who are bringing the baby come. Jest, jokes, interjection, monthly, music providentially arranged. My Lache and the Chow as she hindings back. She shuffling all the diseases of the bell jar. Tidy in the front, down again on the loose, trim and drumming. Young with searching, did the dark he was in a giant You on her rosy cheeses, that'll be the monkey pole with the granny to veil the bay got the slip. Jigger, you're getting cool. 12 stone cool. And the great charging, racing,
When I got the letter from Jack Aarons asking me to again lecture at the Teachers College, I wrote back and said I'd be glad to, that all he had to do was let me know the date. He did. I then said to David Tudor, the lecture is so soon that I don't think I'll be able to get all 90 stories written. In which case, now and then, I'll just keep my trap shut. He said, that'll be a relief.